Hi, how you doing? I just wanted to jump on real fast and talk to you guys about National Poppy Day. Who knew there was such a thing? As we prep for Memorial Day weekend, I remember when we lived in England, we got the chance to go down to the Tower of London. We got to see all the beautiful poppies pouring out of the Tower of London. And then, I remember even like growing up as a kid when at like Walmart or Kmart, you'd have people pass out little poppies like around Veterans Day or Memorial Day weekend. And I always knew that it had something to do with the military, but I never really understood the real history of it. And so I thought today, since it's National Poppy Day, would be a great chance or a great excuse to dive into a little bit more. And again, with the end goal of just being able to teach my kids more about Memorial Day and why it's so important. So let's talk poppies for a minute. So when I was reading, I think one of the, there's many amazing things about the poppy, but one of the things is if you actually look at the poppy flower. So back in 1915, World War I, over in Europe, there was an unusually warm spring. Now, poppies usually don't start popping up until like May, August is kind of like their growth season. But in 1915, it was unusually warm, and with all the foot traffic from all the soldiers and all the battles, the seeds kind of got stirred up earlier than normal. So by the beginning of May, there were already fields of poppies. So that's something, just keep that in the back of your mind. So as you probably know from elementary school, I know my kids were talking about it today, the poppy kind of traces its roots back to a poem that was written by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. The poem is In Flanders Field, and it's also known as We Shall Not Sleep. If you haven't read it lately, or if you don't recall it, it's a beautiful poem. I really suggest that you go back and look it up. So he is sitting in Belgium in May 1915. So again, you've got the poppies in the fields already. And he had just the day before, one of his dear friends was just killed by a German shell. They had to bury his friend at night just for security reasons. So the next morning he was sitting on the back of an ambulance, and on the back of an envelope he penned the poem In Flanders Field. And he just handed it to one of his friends, didn't really make a big to-do about it. Well, the poem ends up making it back to the States and getting published. And the soldier that he handed it to had said that the poem was an exact description of the scene in front of them. And that Lieutenant Colonel McCrae used the word blow in the line because the poppies were actually being blown that gentle morning by a gentle east wind. So it was just kind of really cool that it really does give you an accurate description of what these soldiers saw in this field in Belgium. Now, a few years later, sorry, I've got bugs. A few years later, there was an American back in New York at the YMCA War Secretary's headquarters, and she worked in a reading room, which was basically where the soldiers would come and they would say their final farewells to their families before shipping off overseas. Well, so she's putting magazines away and she comes across Lieutenant Colonel McCrae's poem and she reads it and she says that she was just struck instantly of how the red poppy should be a sign of remembrance of Flanders Field. And she vowed at that very moment that she would wear it every day as a sign of keeping the faith for all who died. So that's how we got the red poppy that were handed out at the stores or that we see being passed around. Miss Michael was kind of the tie between the poppy that we wear and we see and Lieutenant Colonel McCrae's poem. Now, over the next several years, Miss Michael worked really hard trying to get the poppy to be a sign of remembrance, a national sign of remembrance. It wasn't until some years later, in 1919, when it was officially adopted by the American Legion as the U.S.'s official emblem of remembrance. And after that, it was passed on to France, to Australia, to Britain, to Canada, and New Zealand, who now also share the poppy as a sign of remembrance for our fallen soldiers. So I just thought it was a really beautiful story about the poppy. Like I said, I remember always getting them, and they're handed out weekends like Memorial Day weekend, and I knew it was a sign of remembrance, but I wasn't really sure what the tie was. So hopefully that was a little bit of useful information for you to share with your kids, and I hope you guys have a really blessed day and a blessed weekend. Take care. Thanks so much.